So we are at the halfway mark, and I cannot think of a better person to keep the energy alive than Amy Boyd. Amy is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. She's specializing in data and machine learning. Her role as a cloud advocate is to help developers learn, engage, and build on the Microsoft AI platform. I can't think of very many cooler jobs than that, but AI and machine learning are some of my favorite things to debate, particularly around ethics. So I'm sure we'll have some great questions cropping up after this talk as well. And this one will also be a little bit interactive, so be sure to vote alongside Amy as she poses some interesting questions to all of you. So Amy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. What a wonderful introduction, a wonderful video. Hi, everyone. As I said, my name's Amy Boyd. I work at Microsoft, and one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing is AI. And so in this session, I really wanted to talk to you a little bit, not saying that I'm the expert and I have all the answers, because I don't think anyone has all the answers in this space, but I want to just share with you some of the things that I've learned over the past couple of years about ethical AI, about approaches, really cool things to go and look up and also to learn. So caveat this whole talk with that, we probably understand the title a little bit more. So in this talk, we're going to ask ourselves the question, would you trust an AI to, and then fill in the blank, do something for you. So we'll get on to that. I want to caveat a little bit with a present, what's happening right now, what's happening in the past with ethical AI. Then finally go on to, okay, how can we get active in this space? How can I do something to vet or to frame the projects that I might want to work on in the AI space? As Amanda said, there is going to be a little bit of interactivity. It's not going to be hard. It's going to be completely anonymous. But I would love if you have a mobile device in front of you to have it handy as we get into the session. Let's get things moving. There we go. So let's start with what is happening now. So in AI ethics or ethical AI, there's quite a lot happening now. If you read any of the reports, there's this amazing report actually called AI Now. So it's a bit like the now that's highlighted on that slide, caveated with AI. If you go onto that website, there's some amazing people that put together a report. I'm going to say most years, I actually went in to go and find the 2020 report. They've decided not to do one for 2020. It was one of those years, wasn't it? So one of the nice bits here, go to the 2019 report, go to the 2018 report even. That was, in fact, I think 2017 might have been the first one that I read. It's very detailed, but it really gives you a good sense of what's happening in the space, as long as along with legal pieces and stuff like that. But there is also another amazing lady that contributes towards AI now, and her name is Kate Crawford, and she made this amazing keynote appearance at a conference that was previously called NIPS. It's now called NeurIPS. And this is a very, very popular machine learning research conference. I was very, very lucky to get the opportunity to go when it was in LA in 2017. And she said this phrase, she said, classification is a product of its time. And so one of the things here is so true, is that we are always changing, right? And actually, one of the key things that we need to think about when we think about ethical AI is the data that we are producing at the time, but also the data that we're maybe learning from that's historical. I cannot recommend this keynote enough. And so if you want to go and watch it, it's called The Trouble with Bias. And one of the things that she is able to talk through is lots of different scenarios. So if you go to aka.ms/trouble with bias, highly recommend. It's about 50 minutes long, so it's a little longer than we're all used to at the moment being online, but it's well worth a watch. She captures you, she really does. Some of my favorite examples that she tends to talk through revolve around stereotyping, around discrimination. So actually, can you even take part in AI models? Are they built for you? Do they consider your class, your location, your skin color, etc. And she really, really talks through these so well, and actually the history that a lot of this is built into. Now, one that I want to show and feels so relevant for this conference, but also purely recorded by me, these small little demos. It's always a shock, right, when you go to, say, any kind of translation tool. And one of the things that they suffer from a lot is actually when you put in something like she is a developer, very close to my heart, and put it into a language where they don't have gender pronouns, it will actually translate back as he is a developer. Now, we understand why that's happening, right? That we do know that there's not been a lot of women in the space for, especially in history. I hope we're doing better, but we're still not quite there. But this is that idea of kind of not discrimination, but the data set is potentially skewing what's happening. The example that she provides in her talk is he is a nurse, she is a doctor. It's the same kind of idea that it translates back and turns it back into what is the majority of the profession at the time of training. However, one of the interesting things here was I actually went to a website to do the translation. And one of the pieces I found quite interesting was in language, it's kind of a known problem that we might get that if we're learning from historical data, we potentially are missing out categories in that data. Instead of immediately thinking about going to fix the data, which we should be doing, but is potentially a long-term goal, one of the pieces that people do on the UI, which is another way to think about it, right, is you can actually translate it and then provide, if you know that it might cause some kind of issues, provide more data right back. So it actually provides she is a developer and he is a developer in obviously both languages. And so I did think this was a really interesting and different way of thinking about it. And so keep that in mind as we go through this talk about thinking about different ways that we think about problems. So it looks like I'm about to end the talk. I am not. I just want to give you some key learnings that I actually had a chance to speak with an amazing researcher at Microsoft called Hannah Wallach. And she's amazing. She does amazing research in this space. And a lot of her talks and a lot of the things she does for community, these were 3 different top points that I picked out of a conversation that I was lucky enough to have with her, but also that she had with the community. So one of them was ask the question, does this work for everybody throughout the process, and kind of be obsessed with data when you're thinking about AI and modeling. Work with people of all skills and backgrounds to give you that good chance of preempting bias that might be in your model. But we can't necessarily have teams of thousands of people, right? We're all different. And so we might not be able to fill a whole team with every different type of person from across the planet. However, one thing that we could do is proof of concept early and test as widely as you can to learn from mistakes. Now, I think sometimes with AI, it maybe feels the model is very secret, right? It's very valuable. The data is the value really of what it's trained on. And so I think sometimes we feel, oh no, like we don't want to release it yet. It's not ready. It's not trained. It's not had enough data. But actually, if you're very transparent about what you're building and you share that with people very early on and just say, look, this is early doors, we would love your feedback, and you kind of get people involved, we know as people in technical roles that works. That helps people to provide feedback so that if we don't see an issue but someone else does, we can actually work together to solve that problem. And interestingly, I think it's possibly like a human nature type thing. We want to help. Someone always says to me, assume good intent. Everyone's trying their best, and this will actually lead us onto our next thing. Always assume good intent. So one thing I wanted to very quickly cover was it's nice to have hindsight. So it's very easy to look back and have hindsight of things that you could do differently. But it's also good to look back to see whether you would, now that you know something, would do things differently. And so I wanted to take you on a small journey through some research that I did. And every time I do this talk, it feels longer and longer ago that I did this research, starting to feel a little bit older. But basically, I don't know if anyone knows the people on screen. So I know we're probably from we could be all from all across the world here, and this is a very UK centric thing. So I'm from the UK. I live in England, and a while ago on TV, we had a very popular show, a singing show called The X Factor. And each one of these amazing faces was a contestant on The X Factor, I believe, in 2014. You may have heard of some of these people. The gentleman in the middle is named James Arthur. He rose to fame with various different albums. Ella Henderson was my fave to win. I really wanted her to win. She released some singles as well, and did some really, really amazing stuff. And so all of these people were part of the competition. And I'm quite a TV person. I love to binge watch a TV series at the moment, especially. And one of the things, I went to my supervisor at university and I said, I actually want to see whether I can build a machine learning model that predicts the outcome of the X Factor. And actually, as much as he was shocked by this decision for your computer science degree to be the end project, it sounds trivial, but there's actually a lot of technical detail that sits behind it. And so we both came up with the name called the Twitterati. The Twitterati is actually a real phrase. I didn't actually know this. This was my lecturer that came up with this. He said, the Twitterati, it's users of Twitter, especially those who post frequently and have a large number of followers. And so all of these different celebrities were thrust into the limelight. They were just normal people, and they actually suddenly exploded right on Twitter and other social media providers as well. So I had this vision: given Twitter data, can I predict the outcome of the X Factor? And I just wanted to, like I said, it was not trivial. Like, I did a lot of research. There was a lot of math that went in behind this. There was a lot of Python code. And I built lots of different models and researched all sorts of different approaches and thoroughly enjoyed it. The idea that I was so interested in the domain that I was working on that it just became like an addiction almost for me to keep diving into that data. And that kind of brings me on to my next piece. People said, well, did it work? It actually was okay. I actually did a pretty good job. I was able to rank when we had less than 6 contestants, because otherwise the data was quite sparse for some contestants. It actually did a really good job in ranking them in the order of the public vote. And so I was like, that's pretty cool. But the interesting story now to me, because technology has moved on, I would approach this problem so differently now, which is really interesting because it was 6 years ago. I would approach it so differently now. So technology moves on, but the stories behind it don't necessarily change still. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight were, interestingly, if I was to go back, I would make a bigger deal of this graphic specifically in that report. And it was a graph comparing accuracy scores of 2 different models. So we have NB, which is a naive Bayes, a very, very basic algorithm, but very popular and very powerful. And also another one called SVM, which are the bottom 2 lines on that legend of the graph. And an SVM is a support vector machine, very popular in text processing, very well proven to be good on text data. And so I was doing all of the right technical details, checking out lots of different models. But then I started to change the splits in my training data. So I chose positive and negative sentiment tweets. So I actually took them from Twitter. I applied the emoticon. So if there was a smiley face or a sad face or a laughing face, or I actually applied that and added that as the tag. So I was able to quickly provide a supervised learning approach whereas just a massive Twitter data would have to have an unsupervised learning approach. So that was quite cool. That was borrowed from another research paper and built upon. And it was really interesting to see that I could very quickly label some data with okay confidence. There's some issues there with sarcasm and stuff like that. But we could say that actually a lot of the data was very positive or very negative. There was kind of like no in between almost. Oh, fabulous. I'm glad someone can relate so well to the X Factor. I was a big fan. But yeah, the super interesting piece here was kind of, there was actually a natural skew in this data towards positive data. 60% to 40% when I did the split actually always performed better than a 50-50 split of data. So honoring the natural bias within the data can be good, but also we need to understand why we're doing that, because actually that natural bias could work in the opposite direction. So really digging into your data and understanding the domain is so important, and I would do more on that if I was to go back. Here's a story for you. So Ella Henderson, she was one of mine. She was also the bookkeeper, or, you know, for people who wanted to bet on the X Factor as to who would win, she was the favorite to win. And all of a sudden, it was like the biggest shock. It was all over the newspapers, all over the internet. Ella got knocked out. She was gone. And everyone was like, what just happened? And so, as you can see from this, if I did the whole show, because this was when X Factor got really popular and it was split over the whole weekend. So Saturday night was when they sang and Sunday night was when you voted them off. It was amazing, right? But one thing that meant was I had to pick out X Factor tweets from across the whole weekend. And actually, I found some fascinating stuff when I split up these 2 days, and specifically in this situation. So for the whole show, there was a huge amount of negative tweets for Ella that week. And I immediately looked into them, and it said, oh, you know, Ella, it's madness that she's at the bottom of the ranking, or shock, biggest X Factor shock in history. Now, a lot of these negative tweets tended to come after Ella got voted off the show. And I wanted to dig in and understand, but why did she get voted off the show? Because getting voted off the show is a public decision. It is a lot of people making a lot of decisions. And so I was like, right, I'm going to look at Saturday only. So just the Saturday night when she sang, and understand. Now, it was still slightly skewed towards negative, which gave a lot away. And also, when you started to look into some of the tweets, it said that Ella was boring, or that she picked the wrong song for her type of performance. People liked the song, but thought Ella ruined it. Now, I was a big fan of Ella, so no harsh words here. I think she was amazing. But this was really interesting to actually dig into the data, and almost, I call myself sometimes the Sherlock Holmes of data, because I feel like when you get into these projects, you're just diving in, you're understanding things that are happening that maybe skew data slightly. And again, this was a great example of understanding the skew in my data, and actually, was this affecting being able to predict future data? This brings us on to a slightly sadder story, a slightly more upsetting story. This gentleman was named Christopher Maloney, and unfortunately, people just took a disliking to him on the internet. And he got a lot of negative tweets across each week. As you can see there, just highlighted a significant amount of negative tweets. Now, I mentioned that there was a significantly less amount of negative tweets in my data set than there were positive tweets. Well, thank you. And the super interesting piece here was actually, if I look back, I would need to double check that my negative category wasn't also associating itself specifically with Christopher, because if he was populating my training data set quite a lot, there might actually be a natural skew towards anything that relates to this gentleman here. And so again, understanding the context of the data is so important. And these are all different things that I would look into. My final one before we move on to the framework that I'd like you to maybe think about applying is to look at this piece. So when I set out to predict the outcome of the X Factor, I had to have something called my gold standard data. So I have a nice little graphic there with lots of gold stars. This is my gold standard data. And in this case, so what I test against, so what I say, well, is my model any good at predicting something? My gold standard data was the phone calls, the numbers of them that were publicly put on Wikipedia, so that they are released to the public after the fact of the show, that said each week which contestant got the most votes and second most and third most and fourth most. So they were ranked by votes per week. And this was really amazing data to find. I was so happy when I found this, because I thought this is really going to help me understand if my model is doing a good job. Now, my actual data, my training data, is very different from that, right? Because I specifically took it from Twitter. Anything with hashtag X Factor on it and anything with an emoticon was basically my go-to for data. Again, these two sources of data, something that I'm training on and something that I'm testing on, could actually be very different audiences. So Twitter data at the time, it's obviously very popular in the tech industry. So maybe I had a lot of techies. I don't know what that Venn diagram looks like of a crossover of people who work in tech and watch the X Factor. Who knows? Maybe once someone will find out. But it's also maybe likely to be younger people at the time. This was obviously a few years ago. And, social media is very much used by that. However, the people who phoned to vote, number one, have to pay. So they have to have permission of the person who pays the phone bill. Phoning at the time, now you can always do that in competitions, but actually now I think the X Factor has an app and you can vote for free and stuff like that to keep people ingrained. We've moved on a little bit. But at the time, the audience for those who were phoning and those who were tweeting potentially could be incredibly different. And so I might have predicted based on the Twitter user base, but did that actually align up with the rankings that were done by those who paid to vote? And so each of these things was something that if I was to go and do it again, I would have to ask these questions earlier on in my research to prove a point about whether it's useful or not to be building a model like that. So we've talked a little bit about some of the issues that have happened in the past. Text processing suffers from maybe having older historical data. Sometimes in vision problems, we don't have enough training data for certain types, possibly different skin tones, possibly different types of people from across the world. And so all of these things lead to unfortunate bias. We then moved on to looking retrospectively, and it was so easy to look retrospectively and say, oh, I would do this differently. Oh, I would do this differently. Assume good intent. In my model, I didn't want to make those mistakes, but I potentially did make those mistakes because I wasn't applying constant thinking at the time around that type of approach. And so everyone always asks me, or whenever you go to an ethical AI talk, it's, but what do I do? I don't want to build a model that discriminates someone. I don't want to build a model that is gonna, make it hard for someone in some form of their life. Assume good intent. I just want to build something that helps. And so how do we start moving forwards? This is a hard question. This is a very complex question. And so what I want to do is I want to show you an example of a case study that I had the opportunity to watch another gentleman from Microsoft called Michael Robson present. He did a fantastic job of really opening my mind to a new way of thinking about this. And this wasn't your usual ethical AI talk. So this is where we come to, would you trust an AI too? I go into a lot of detail in a blog post just here at aka.ms/ethical-ai-questions. This was part of a series of content that we built for something called AI April, which you can also go and have a look at if you're interested. But one of the things I did here was really wrote down my thinking as I went through this conference session with Michael. And I kind of really related to the way that he approached it. And I'm going to actually ask you to get involved now if you can. get your phone ready. Indeed. So I've used Poll EV. I've used it before. I hope this works. If it doesn't, it's not the end of the world, but we would love you to get involved. So my first question is, would you trust an AI to recommend a product or service? So let me open up this. Now, if people start voting, I'm hoping this will just start to populate. If we could have anyone just confirm that this is actually working. Yay. Okay, we've got someone voting. So this is great. So it is working. So if you go to pollev.com/amyboyd618, that should be able to get you in, and then you just vote. So I'll give you a minute and I'll give you my perspective. So would I trust an AI to recommend a product or service? Yeah, like if anything, that's probably why I have a really bad shopping habit, right? So I am an avid online shopper. I am really, really keen on when they recommend me something new, like you bought this, I think you'll like this. They get me every time with it. And so I use this a lot. So I would vote yes. Like this would be a definite yes for me. We see it a lot with a lot of big retail providers. And actually now, because we're democratizing AI, we're actually seeing it a lot for really any e-commerce that is online and available to you. They really want to upsell and recommend a product. So there we go. So we got a lot of yeses. So 91% to a 9% of no. Don't know is a fair answer here. I've put don't know on every question because they will get harder. So let's move on. It's going to be the same way of accessing the question. So hopefully we can continue. So the next question is, would you trust an AI to help keep you safe online? So this one, would I help with keeping? Well, to me, it's a yes. I don't think I can necessarily always catch the bad guys. If they're trying to do phishing emails and stuff like that, if there's something that can help keep me safe online, that can understand if someone's trying to get onto my device and block it, if we can get information about different types of attacks and that can help to keep me safe online. Yeah, I understand why this one was maybe a little bit closer. I do understand it because realistically, we have to do a lot personally to keep ourselves safe online. Oh, there we go. Oh my goodness, look at that. It is a total split on this one. This is only question number 2. It's going to get harder. So let's carry on. Here we go. Would you trust an AI to assist your driving? So this one for me, interesting no came straight up there. I'm a don't know on this one. So interestingly, I know that there are car manufacturers out there that are looking at autonomous vehicles. There's very popular brands that are very well known for this. I know of people who have these cars that can drive themselves. They tell me good things in most cases. I am lucky enough to have a car that's getting there. That's a funny message. I don't even trust myself to drive. Exactly right. So maybe an AI driving is better. That is where I was actually going to go to on this. I'm lucky enough to have a car recently that helps you park. Which was amazing for me. I know that's a massive stereotype, but if a car parks for me, it'd probably do a better job than I will. So happy to hand that one off. This one's an interesting one. Yeah, we've got an okay amount of assisting. People would be okay with it. Some people absolutely not. My husband, interesting enough, was like a big no-no. He was like, no way. He likes driving. Like he likes driving. He doesn't want someone else to do it for him. And I don't know one is fair. So let's carry on, because again, we're going to get a little harder. So assisting driving and then driving you. I think we probably covered a bit of both. So actually, we'll carry on with this one. What about this one? Would you trust an AI to monitor your health? Monitor your health. So this one is very much. Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually got it on right now, but I do have a fitness device that I wear, and it tells me quite a lot. And I quite like that I can track on their app, like things over time. So if I submit data, it can tell me about patterns and trends and research. Like I find that quite interesting. I also find it's only as intrusive as I want it to be. And that feels good to me. Yeah, people seem happy with monitoring health. This is an interesting one. 75% seem happy with that. What about if it, would you trust an AI to dispense medication? So this was kind of the difference maybe between assisting your driving and having it drive you to, would you allow it to take full control of dispensing medication? So if you, lots of great comments here. Thank you so much for getting involved. It's really exciting to see your involvement. Would you trust an AI to dispense medication? I'm on the fence here. My pessimism will really shine here, where I immediately go to the situation where it doesn't work. What if something goes wrong? If something goes wrong, do I have the option to override it? Then maybe I'm okay with it. Should I have the option to override it? I think so. But yeah, this one's a really interesting one, right? Don't know is a fair answer here. It's not something that I've come into contact with as a product. So it's not something I've tried before, or no, I don't think I know anyone that's tried it. So we can see, right, that we're able to make a decision, but what is our decision being made on? And so my final one, I actually want to take you through a case study. So would you trust an AI to help you choose a babysitter? This one was like a frisbee to the head, right? Like what? Like this was not one that I thought AI would be useful, but would you trust an AI to help you choose a babysitter, someone to look after your children? So your children, or your nieces and nephews, or your brothers and sisters, or someone that you care for. It's an interesting one, right? Like it's not something I've come across. So lots and lots of questions. I guess could it help me choose a babysitter? There's something in the wording there, isn't there, as well? Like does it have final decision on who it chooses, or is it more of a matching algorithm, a bit like a dating app or something like that? It's an interesting one. So we've gone for mostly no, 60% no. Yes is creeping up to a 38%, and don't know is again another fair answer. Would you help it? I don't know. No idea, right? So keep that in mind as we talk a bit about Company X. Company X, this did happen. And one of the interesting things is how we can talk about approaches that can maybe question earlier on than Company X did. But what did Company X do? So Company X put out a product that said, can I help you? Can an AI help you find a babysitter? So you have a small or young person in your family, or someone that you care for. And there's lots of people out there, lots of reputable people, hopefully, out there that could look after your child, your niece, your nephew, your brother, your sister, someone that you care for. And so the Company X thought of an algorithm whereby what if they were able to evaluate each person against their social media accounts? So you would take a person, they would look through all of their social media, historical and current, and they would measure them against different measures. And some of the measures could be, does this person have a disrespectful attitude? Are there some posts that you would be concerned about? Do they have a happy profile in some senses? You would want someone who was happy, follows rules, is a good influence on your child, is safe to be around your child, etc. And also maybe that they have the morals that you have as well. So this was something that this AI could be built for, right? It could help you understand about the candidates that you're looking at to look after your child. And so one of the things here was that values idea and ethics. The word ethics or ethical or morals relate to certain things. They actually relate to values that are based on the well-being that we have, on the well-being of others, and values that are based on our own well-being. And so some examples include these just here. So We have values around suffering. We have values around autonomy, so the ability for us to move about, the ability for us not to, to be constrained. Also equality and fairness. But then also on our own, so our own virtues, how we trust and stuff like this. So these are all different areas of ethics as a bigger topic. So not AI ethics specifically, but the word ethics. It breaks down into these different categories. And what's interesting is these ethical categories relate quite nicely to something called the FATE framework. So FATE it stands for fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics. And these do apply to AI. And actually, the FATE organization is available at it's a Microsoft organization that are called FATE. You can go and find them online, and they do a lot of research around ethical AI, and then these specific categories that we break them down into. And this was where Michael, in his imminent wisdom, shared with us this framework of these questions that we could ask under each category. And so do take a minute to kind of take a look at some of these, but I'll pick out just a few. So if we were to think about company X, right, I was a bit on the fence. I was like, oh, it's not something I've heard of before, this AI solution. It's not something that we kind of want to, we necessarily know what's kind of going to come next if this happened. Would I take the outcome of it? Well, this is the interesting thing, right? Is anyone being treated differently? Well, I can ask my question, and actually, someone is being treated differently. What if you were a slightly a person who's older in society, or maybe someone who just doesn't engage in social media? If you are someone of that kind, how do you go through this process? How does that apply to you if you just don't have a social media presence? Does that mean that you are not recommended for the job? Maybe it means that you definitely are recommended for the job. I'm not sure. And so that's a really interesting one, right? It's different types of people. Maybe older people are less likely to be actively involved in social media. And does that stop them from maybe taking part in this solution? What about, is there a mechanism to feedback or change the result? That's a good question, isn't it? Like, I didn't, if I said don't know, or I said no, but actually I have like a million questions to ask. These are all things that maybe an AI model should offer in order to be fair, accountable, transparent, and ethical. So, is there ultimately a human accountable? Like, do I make the final decision if I'm the user of this app? And is it just is it a recommendation? Most of us felt okay. A lot of people, who voted felt okay for someone to recommend an item of clothing, but something for our child, is that a different step? Is that not something that we want to do? Is it clear that an AI is being used? I think in this case, it is clear that an AI is being used, but is it understood and well described? I didn't really understand the categories, if I'm honest, from the social media. They all had negative connotations. Do we offset them with positive connotations? Is there any societal impacts on this? Are there certain types of people that would use this? Is there a specific market for this type of app? Is there someone who is monitoring this app? Is there someone who could be a bad actor and get access to this app and actually override its decisions? All of these questions are fair. And actually, this was the most important part of this talk that I took away, was these were all great questions to be asking. And especially as someone, again, who I enjoy building AI models, it's an area of tech that I'm thoroughly interested in. But having this type of framework to ask these questions of anything that I'm going to consider building is so useful straight up front. And so I highly recommend. This is by no means like do this and everything's fine type thing, but it definitely is something that you might want to take into account. And I think it could help us catch a few little, maybe we should be doing things slightly differently. Should we be describing stuff better? Should we be having a human that's accountable at the end of the day? Should we be having someone who oversees the system, for example, in order to make this a truly usable product? Just to wrap up, we've talked about so much. We talked about the research that's happening with AI now and some amazing keynote sessions at machine learning conferences. And they talk a lot about some of the mistakes we are currently making. And then we moved on to hindsight and looking back at research that I'd done and how easy it was to pick some, issues with inside any project that you do. Then I wanted to share with you a framework that you can maybe take away, and it could be a nice little sense check, you, your team, your first types of users, to ask these questions of an AI model and an AI solution. And then finally, interpretability is a really, really interesting part of ethical AI at the moment. And this is actually more of a tooling or process-based activity. So if you are building models, maybe you're building them with Python at the moment, I'd highly recommend going and looking at some of the tooling that Microsoft's made available and some of the learning documentation that's available that you're able to actually apply directly to the model to truly understand your data, understand if there's any issues with inside that data. So I would just wanted to put that up there because we've looked at maybe the softer skills side of this session, but there is a lot of tooling and research that's going into this type of area as well. And I think these two things together, as well as reading and more research, will help us hopefully create and not make as many mistakes that potentially discriminate people with AI models. We've covered so much. I hope you've had fun. Thank you for interacting with my poll, Evie. That worked really well. I just wanted to share with you some resources. There's quite a lot. I'll probably tweet about this. I don't know. I'll chat with the C#, organizers, see whether they're putting anything anywhere. I definitely share these with you. I highly recommend going and watching that keynote. I think it's one of my favorite ever keynotes. Kate Crawford is an incredible speaker. She's also very, very good at explaining this specific area of technology. So do go to aka.ms/thetroublewithbias. I've also provided you some responsible AI resources. I do work for Microsoft, and so I want to show kind of the approach that we're putting out there to responsible AI. There's some great stuff at that link, ak.ms/msbuild-responsibleml, that allows you to just read through. It's got like a whole thing on conversational AI. So if you're creating chatbots, I've been reading through some of that recently when building some conversational AI pieces. I mentioned the AI Now report. This is a much broader thing. This is not a Microsoft specific piece. However, it's very interesting to read what happens each year and the different steps that we're taking to try and improve on ethical AI. And then amazing. This module's in the Cloud Skills Challenge. Fantastic. So if you go to aka.ms/C#challenge, this exact explain your ML models is in there. So please do go and take that module. I'm so glad it's in there. I didn't actually realize this is perfect. But this allows you to learn more about ethical AI and actually that tooling piece of it. So if you pair that with the framework that we talked about, you can try you can do your best to try to build ethical AI. And then also there's some great documentation as well on this kind of stuff. It is not necessarily easy, so strap yourselves in, get yourselves a cup of tea or a coffee before you read through it, but it's well worth learning a bit more about this area. So that's all from me. My name's Amy. It's been an absolute pleasure to share all of this great content with you.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was super informative. I think we'll just have a few questions and then we'll jump right into our next presentation. But I was wondering if there were platforms that had maybe more bias built in than others. Like I know for myself, like I use Twitter a lot to complain. So I was curious if you had, from your experience, if there were some platforms that just like were more negative, like there was more like negative NPS kind of responses than others.
Yeah. That's so interesting. That was kind of so it's interesting, right? Because I immediately, when I do this session now, I do go, oh, but the like social media has a lot of negativity, right? And so I was really shocked to find this was obviously a while ago. So we might have changed the way that we use social media, but also the fact that there was more positivity. That could also be skewed because X Factor is a singing competition, which at its heart, music is life, right? Music's lovely. It makes us feel good. It gives us endorphins. Like, it's a fun show to watch. It's lighthearted. So maybe there was some of the positivity was biased towards that. But you're absolutely right. Like, social media has a lot of negative sides to it. Instagram comments, for example, can be really, really painful if people post pictures and people are quite judgmental on different things. Oh, thanks, Sarah. That's really kind. So yeah, I definitely think there are skews. If you think about things as well, there is probably a polar kind of piece going on here. Like, if I was on social media, I'm not going to post something if I'm just like, that was okay. Like, I just wouldn't say anything, right? So the neutral is kind of removed, and you're only going to post if you really, really like it or you really, really don't like it as well. Like, there's probably not going to be a lot of in between. Same with reviews. If you think about reviews on products, there are some out there where they go, yeah, this is just okay. And you're like, oh, cool. But most of the time it's like a very positive or a very negative response. And so definitely understanding, again, like your domain and your data set to understand, like, am I going to naturally skew in a direction? Like, hopefully if it was something, like, I'm thinking if it was like an AI for good initiative, actually that might have negative comments in it as well. But yeah, I think you're always going to see a polar sort of change. I don't think a lot of people share a lot if they're just like, oh, this is okay. However, I definitely recommend diving in and really thinking about the people who use that data set in aggregate, sort of thing. It's a really good idea.
That's great advice. I did notice that you did have quite a few neutral responses. How did you sift through those? Was it like, did you have to do that manually at the beginning to kind of get an understanding for what types of comments were coming through?
Yeah, there was a lot of me on Twitter whilst the exam was on during this research. I called it work, but was it? I don't know. It like crossed over into my personal life. But one of the fun things around that was every time I built this sentiment analyzer, and so it really works on probabilities of it being a positive tweet and probabilities of it being a negative tweet. So negative was 0 and positive was 1. And so anything close to those categories was put into those categories. However, I didn't want it on a 50-50 split. Like, if it was like, oh, I'm 0.42% sure it's negative, that's too close for me. So I basically cut a neutral category out. And it was interesting when I kind of like dug into that data, it was a lot of factual pieces. So it was a lot of maybe like a newspaper quoting facts or headlines more than it was like someone actually commenting on a singer. And that was quite interesting. If I was to do it again, I would maybe do a bit of a research piece or an experiment on removing that data completely and seeing just opinions, and then also keeping it in and seeing how that works.
Oh, that's fascinating. I might even start watching X Factor. Is it still running? I don't even know.
I don't know. I don't watch it now. I actually moved on to Love Island. If you look me up on Medium, I wrote a whole load of stuff on Love Island, and I tried to predict the outcome of Love Island.
That's so cool.
In the UK, it's very, very popular, and I was like addicted to it. I'm so sad it can't happen right now. There are pros and cons to that show. There's a lot of negativity also, but it's just fun relaxation for me. But I started to apply data science to it, and I did actually quite a good job of finding some interesting things. So yeah, if you look up Amy Boyd on Medium, I wrote a blog post on there. It's still quite a well-read one. Not a lot of my other technical content is.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Amy. This was fascinating to chat with you. And we're just going to pop right over to our quick video and then hop right into our next chat with Saskia. But thank you so much. I think you'll probably be on our networking reception if some others have questions for you as well.
Yes, I hope to be there for a little bit. So yeah, if there's any questions, come find me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much and hope to see you soon.
All right, thanks so much.